Today is Sunday. Morning. It's Tes Shvat, Tovshin Ayin Gimel, and we are in Sefer Mamarim, Tovshin Yud Aleph, Tovshin Yud Beis, in the Mamar Veheinif Yodo al hanohor of Achron Shal Pesach, Tovshin Yud Aleph, and we are on page Nun Tes, at the paragraph that starts with Veheinif. We're discussing in this Mamar the idea of Mashiach, and that the most unique quality that Mashiach will possess is the fact that V'hariche b'yiras Hashem, as the Talmud says, Moirech v'doyin, he will judge through scent, rather than, as we know, judgment in the conventional way, where you present evidence and so on and so forth. He will judge through the sense of smell, of scent. What's this idea of scent? The Rebbe began to explain that the idea of the sense of smell is connected to the etzem neshama, to the very highest levels of the neshama. Food also is connected to the neshama. Food gives the person energy. It means it strengthens the neshama's, the soul's connection with the body. But that only touches the levels of the soul that are bipnimius, internally expressed in the person, in the physical body of the person. Whereas the levels of the soul that are beyond usual expression, specifically chaya and yechida, the two makifin of the soul, the aspects of the soul that hover around the person rather than clothing themselves internally in the person, those aspects of the neshama are not reachable through food. For that you need smell. That's why we find if a person faints, one of the ways to revive him is through a scent, a strong scent. And depending on the degree of the fainting, how deep it is, that will determine how strong of a smell you need. If it is a very deep fainting, you need a very strong, sharp smelling salts. Why? Because in a very deep state of fainting, you need to draw from what he called chayin de chayin, the life of life. There's chayin, which is the first makif, the closer aspect of the soul that hovers. The chaya, makif of chaya. Then you have the makif of yechida, which is basically the very essence of the neshama. And in order to access that, you need something more powerful and stronger. And that is through the sense of smell, through this powerful scent. And as the Rebbe said, the mouth is the portal of the heart, the nose is the portal of the brain, particularly the life force, the pneumius of the brain, which is the life force of the person, and which is connected to the essence of the soul.
Does it connect this all to calling someone's name when they faint? Because it's another way of...
No, not here at least. And the Rebbe also said that in these two makifin, these two levels of light that hover, as we mentioned in the neshama, this is the idea that the level of chayin and chayin, the chaya and the yechida. In the Oiris Elyonim, in the celestial lights, as it were, we're talking about the level of Keser known as Atik, which is the deeper dimension of Keser, right? And in Keser you have two components in the internal dimension of Keser. In Atik you have two components. You have Chetzonius Atik and Pnimius Atik, the external aspect of Atik, and you have the internal aspect of Atik. So Chayin would be the Chetzonius Atik, Chayin de Chayin would be Pnimius Atik. That's basically what we discussed. And now the Rebbe goes in and takes this a step further. Now what happens when we draw from Pnimius Atik? What happens when we draw? How does that affect the consciousness of the individual when you draw from such a high level of Pnimius Atik? That's where we're up to page Nun Tes by Veheinif. Veheinif ha'hamshach m'bchinas Pnimius Atik po'el es gam b'inyan ha'seichel. Drawing from the level of the internal dimension of Atik affects also the intellect of the person. What does that mean? When you activate Pnimius Atik, the inner dimension of Atik, of the higher level of Kesser, that affects also the intellect of the person, that it becomes in a completely different way. Vehu inyan pnimius Abba pnimius Atik. In the Kabbalah, it's brought that the internal dimension of Abba, which is Chochmah, is linked to the internal dimension of Atik. In other words, there is Atik as it is in its place, then there is Atik as it is linked to Abba, to Chochmah. But which aspect of Chochmah? Of Abba? Pnimius Abba, the very innermost dimension of Chochmah. It gets a little technical and Kabbalistic here, so we just have to go through it and we'll get to the point that he's trying to make. So the idea of Chochmah, Pnimius Chochmah, Pnimius Abba, is Pnimius Atik, the very innermost dimension of Atik. What does that mean? That there's a link between, a very, very strong link between the two, an unusual link. In the sense that Pnimius Atik finds expression in Pnimius Abba. The very innermost dimension of Atik finds expression in the very innermost dimension of Chochmah. What does that mean in more practical terms? Where does intellect come from? Intellect comes from its source, from the power of intellect, the source of intellect. Right? That's the usual way. Omnam, hamshacha zu eine behechach. It is not this drawing down of seichel, of intellect, from its source, from the koyach hamaskil, from the power of intellect, from the source of intellect. It's not necessarily a must. In other words, it doesn't must come down from there. It means to say that it could remain in the source. It doesn't necessarily mean that because you have the power, the source of intellect, that automatically that will come down and be revealed in a way of revealed seichel. Not necessarily. How do we know? As we see, it does happen that on occasion, intellect is not drawn down from its source. It doesn't come down begili in a revealed way, right? Sometimes, for example, when we are inspired to learn, which means what? To engage in intellectual pursuits. So we're inspired to do so, and we do that. Sometimes we're not. Why is that? Because seichel doesn't necessarily automatically have to come in a revealed way from the Koyach HaMaskil. We have the power of intellect. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to happen. There are certain conditions which can assist the person in pursuing those intellectual pursuits, which means that the seichel comes down from the Koyach HaMaskil, and there are certain circumstances which hinder the person from engaging in intellectual pursuits. What happens when a person when the seichel does not come, when the intellect does not come down and is revealed from the power of intellect, from its source? What do? What's the answer to this? How can we assist this? K'mayim and Azal, as our sages say in the Gemara, a person should always learn in the place that his heart desires, which could mean a number of things. It could mean in the physical place that he desires. It could also mean that he should learn a subject that he wants to learn, which means what? Sheharotzen, in other words, that the rotzen will that has a power, the strength to what? To draw from the power of intellect, from the source of intellect, that it should come down in a revealed way, and the person should actually learn. But then sometimes rotzen is not enough. Will is not enough. However, sometimes it happens that for whatever reason, for an assortment of reasons, whether they are side reasons, side issues, or inner issues, meaning to say, they're either issues that are from outside the person, it's got distractions, right? He's got worries, he's got good morning, he's got all sorts of other issues that interfere and hinder and interfere with his ability to want to learn, or inner reasons. And he says in the brackets, for example, when the mind becomes dull, or Timtum amoyach could mean, the mind becomes the dullness of the mind, the dulling of the mind. For example, it says that certain foods, if a person eats and engages in certain, consumes certain foods, that causes timtum amoyach. It causes the mind to become. There's a story told, I believe it's from the Rambam, that the Rambam once visited, I think, Yemen, and he met a Gadol Yisrael over there, great man, and they struck up a relationship. And then when the Rambam went back to where he lived, this man would write to the Rambam all sorts of questions, and the Rambam would reply to him. One day he got a question from him in a letter, the Rambam, which was very, very odd, so far as the Rambam was concerned. It was a question that he felt that a man of that stature shouldn't ask. It was a question in emunah and things of that nature. So the Rambam was, very surprised. He didn't bother answering it. But the man persisted. He kept on writing and writing and writing, until finally the Rambam said, he felt he had to answer him, so he wrote back to him and he said that he should check what's going on with the shachtim and the bodkim in his city. What's the state of the ritual slaughterers there? And he went ahead and he checked, and they found out that for the last 13 years, the sheikhet has been feeding them basically in the velas of treifas. They were eating non-kosher food. And because of that, that had an effect on his neshama, and those questions arose as a result of that. So we see that there are certain things that can interfere with our ability to perceive how we perceive things, our state of intellect, our state of our heart, and so on and so forth. So sometimes there are these things that cause the dullness, the dulling of the mind. And in that state, and when a person is in that state, when a person is in that state, then even his will, his desire, will also that will not help. It won't be enough to affect the seichel to be drawn down from its source. So what do you do then? When a person is in that state where even his desire doesn't assist him to learn Torah, to learn, what does he do? What's the eitzah for that? What's the solution for that? What's the remedy for that? To learn Torah with Kabbalah Sel, with the acceptance of the yoke. What does that mean? Shemachriach atzmei. You compel yourself. Umeiser atzmei, and you give yourself away bechol atzmusei, with the entire essence el limit of the learning. You force yourself, basically. What happens as a result? That has the ability, ultimately, to cause that seichel to be revealed, the intellect to be revealed from the koyach hamaskil, from its source, and you begin to learn. How does it work?
So this is where you're not using chokmah, you're using ratzon.
You're not even using ratzon.
What are you using?
Kabbalah Sel. Kabbalah Sel, the acceptance. I'm just doing it. That's it. So how does that work? Seichel. To draw down the seichel from the source of seichel, I can't. To use my power of will, ratzon, which is beyond seichel, right? It also doesn't work. So what do? I use Kabbalah Sel, the acceptance of the yoke. That seems to be what? Below everything, right? It seems to be even below seichel. So ratzon, which is beyond seichel, that doesn't work. Seichel doesn't work. Koyach hamaskil doesn't work. Ratzon doesn't work. Dafka what? Something which is below everything works. How does that happen? Omnam, he says, sheirish gili zehu l'mayla mekoyach hamaskil, because the root of this revelation is even beyond the source of seichel. In fact, it's even beyond what? Ratzon, as we'll see in a minute. In Kabbalistic terminology, it says, "V'hu bechinas avira." I'm just going to translate this. Don't ask me to elaborate too much. This is the air, she'al gabe kruma, which is on top of the membrane, the chafya al moicha, which covers the brain. Okay? I think anatomically what he's trying, which is what? Bechinas moicha da'atika. This is the mind, the brain of Atik. Right? Because we know that every dimension has the whole part is of 10. So even in Atik, in the inner dimension of Kesed, you also have 10. You have Chochmah V'Nedas of Atik, and so on and so forth, right? So, what are we talking about? This air that's on top of the membrane that hovers, that surrounds the brain, this is the Mayach of Atik. So the brain is Chochmah, or the brain is, as we know, the spiritual anatomy of the brain is Chochmah V'Nedas. Then you have the skull that surrounds the brain. That's like the Gulgoylus, that's Atik, that's Kesed. Then between the skull and the brain, there's air. At least that's what he says here. There's a space, as it were. which covers the membrane that surrounds the brain. That air, so it's not the brain, which would be Chochmah bin Das, so to speak. It's not the skull, it's between the skull and the brain. What is it? What is that? That is the Mayach of Atik. Okay? Specifically, Das of Atik. As if you remember, Das we learned in one of the previous Mamar is the idea of connecting, right? So what does it mean? The Das, the Atik, Ach Zinahira B'Hayavira. The level of Das, of Atik, of the inner dimension of Keser. I think Ach means takes hold, or shows Nahira, its light, B'Hayavira, in this air, in this space, so to speak. What does that mean? Sheboikeya Hakrum, this Das of Atik, the intellect, the brain, the mind of Atik, breaks through, splits through the membrane, and draws from the hidden brain, which means the brain of Atik, and it draws it down where to the revealed brain, to the seichel as we know it, so to speak. What's the bottom line? It means to say that through Kabbalah's oil, right, through acceptance of the yoke, you reach into a place which is even beyond seichel, beyond the Kerech HaMaskil, the source of seichel, beyond even Ratzon, right? Beyond even the power of Ratzon, of will. What happens when I access that level? When I access that level, the revelation of seichel becomes in a very, very powerful and strong way. This is the idea of the Kabbalistic term when the Kabbalah says the inner aspect of Abba, of Chochmah, is the inner aspect of Atik. What does that mean? That embedded within the inner dimension of Chochmah is the inner dimension of Atik, very highest levels of the inner dimension of Keser, right? And on occasion, if necessary, we could and we do access that. And when we access that, right, then the seichel is in a completely different way. What does that mean? Shemetzat pnimis Atik, unlike ordinary seichel, as we mentioned before, it's not always there. It doesn't necessarily have to be drawn down from its source. There could be things that interfere. Even Ratzon, even if we have a desire, there's something that could interfere with our desire. So again, not necessarily is the seichel accessed, right? If we do it with Kabbalah's oil, which reaches what? The very deepest dimensions of Atik, and we activate our seichel, as a result of that, that causes the seichel that it must be revealed. That's inherently different than the other levels that we discussed. So that's number one. Number one, if we access our seichel as a result of what? Tapping into the inner dimensions of Atik, the seichel must be revealed. Our intellect will be revealed. In addition to that, the seichel zeh shenimshech al pnimis Atik hu l'mayla mekol hagbala. In addition to that, the seichel, the intellect that is accessed and drawn down through activating the inner dimensions of Atik, is beyond any limitation. We'll soon try to flesh this out in more tangible terms. The Rebbe is going to, right? But this is just the Kabbalistic anatomy of it all. Veheinif, when we talk about intellect that is drawn down from the source of it, the intellect, and it's drawn down how? Through the power of will, through willing yourself to engage in the intellectual pursuits. That is limited according to his desire. To the extent that he wants to learn, to that extent, his seichel will be active. V'gam ha-seichel shenimshech mitzad chitzenis ha-tainug shekosher im rotzen harei mugbul lefi midas ha-shleimus shel ha-seichel sheyeshna b'chitzenis ha-tainug. If you notice, he's using the expressions rotzen. We have over here three terms. We have seichel, we have rotzen, desire, tainuk, pleasure. Seichel generally is the domain of the intellect, so that would be, for example, chokhmah, bina, and das, as we know it, in the sense of the intellect. Rotzen is chitzenis, hakeser, and tainug is primis, hakeser. But in tainug, you have two levels. You have the chitzenis tainug and you have the primis tainug. That's what he mentioned before, that even in the inner dimension of keser, you have the two dimensions. You have the external aspect and you have the inner aspect, right? So, what were we saying? So there's seichel. Rotzen, which is beyond seichel, can compel the seichel to be activated. Sometimes, if I don't want, then it's not activated. So for that, I have to what? I have to access something deeper. What is that? I start with Kabbalah's oil, and that activates the very inner dimensions of Kesser. So seichel that comes from Rotzen, seichel that's activated through Rotzen, through desire, is limited according to my desire. Even when we talk about Tainug, which is the higher level, if it's only Chetzenis Tainug, the external dimension of Tainug, that's still connected to will to a certain extent. It's limited according to the measure of seichel that you will find in Tainug. I know that's a little technical here, but let's just go through the words here. When somebody learns by accepting the yoke, there's no limitations. It's not because he wants. It's not because he has any pleasure. It's not because he's activating it through the Koyach HaMaskil, right? He's compelling himself to learn, so there's no limitation. It doesn't depend on how much he wants to or how much pleasure he has. He's learning. So therefore, that has the ability to draw down from the Pnimius of Tainug, the very, very internal aspects of Tainug, which means as close as you can get to the Etzem. And when it's in that way, Azaya Seichel L'Lamayla Machalak Bol, then the Seichel has no limits whatsoever. Although it's drawn down, the Seichel comes down into actual Seichel, revealed Seichel, it has no limitation. What does it mean it has no limitation, in a certain sense? Seichel is limited at the end of the day. It means to say, I think, one of the ways that it's possible to explain this is, that whereas when you talk about Seichel coming from the Koyach HaMaskil, or Seichel as it comes as a result of Rotzen, right? Or even Chetzenis HaTainug, these three levels, then as he said, to the extent that you want, and to the extent that you enjoy it, you will learn. Right? So it could change. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But if I'm able to access my Kabbalah's oil and force myself to learn, so long as I'm able to activate that, then there's no limitations. In other words, it doesn't depend on Rotzen, it doesn't depend on Tainug, it doesn't depend on anything. In other words, the problem might be that I might not be able to compel myself. I might not have the strength to activate my Kabbalah's oil. But once I activate my Kabbalah's oil, it will cause me to sit down and to learn. So in that sense, it's blikvul. In other words, it's limitless in its ability to activate seichel. Rotzen and Tainug are limited in their ability to activate the seichel. And therefore the seichel is also limited. Kabbalah's oil, once I've activated my Kabbalah's oil, I think that in a certain sense that's how we can explain it. It's a difficult part. I don't think we should focus on it and dwell on it because we consider there's Mamorim in Samach Vav, Pashas Vayetze, Pashas Vayishlach, two long Mamorim which talk about the idea of Pnimius Abba, Pnimius Atik. There's a Maimer in Lekut Torah in the Tzavim. There's a Ha'ara from the Rebbe. It's a very long sugya, but let's go through the Maimer. Like I said, let's cover the material and we'll come back and we'll see what are the salient points from all of these technical terminology that the Rebbe is trying to get. Ultimately, he's trying to get to the idea of Mashiach, right? And the in Evreach. So let's move on a little bit. Ois Gimel. Another couple of minutes. According to all that we explained before, we will understand that the main quality of Mashiach is connected to the idea of scent, of smell. The Meirach V'doyin, that he will judge through scenting, through smelling. Why? Shezeh mitzad mailas inyan hareach. Shezeh mitzad mailas inyan hareach. Shemagiyah ba'etzem. This is as a result of the special quality possessed in smell, which reaches the essence. That's what we explained before. What does it mean? It reaches the essence. Bechinas pnimius atik. It reaches the very inner dimensions of atik, the highest levels of kesser, of the crown. Ube'oifen. And in what way? Shemisham nimshach gam b'chochma b'seichel hagoli. It means that we're talking about accessing the very highest dimensions of atik, of kesser, in a way that we draw it down also in wisdom and in revealed wisdom and intellect. Shezehu inyan meirach v'doyin. This is, in other words, this is the meaning behind when we say Mashiach will smell, will scent, and judge. Judging is what? Is the idea of seichel. When you're judging, you're assessing a situation, you're using your power of intellect, right? But how will he do that? Meirach. So on the one hand you have the smell, the scent, and on the other hand you have the intellect. So the scent, the smelling, is the idea of reaching into the very deepest, highest levels, and at the same time v'doyin, to judge, that it finds expression in the intellect, revealed. Even though it's on one hand it's what? We're talking about judging, meaning to say, engaging in an activity, in an endeavor, for which you need to use your intellect in a revealed way. He will not judge by the sight of his eyes and not by hearing through his ears, meaning to say, not based on the conventional, usual way of dealing with matters of this nature. Hainu, in other words, he will not judge according to understanding and grasping and comprehension. And not even beyond that. Scholar means the source of the intellect. At the very highest levels, chokhmah is connected to the ear, to sight. It's even beyond that. What are we talking about? He will smell, he will scent, and he will judge. What kind of a judgment is that? So the Rebbe says, Shahadin, hu al pe'inin areach shemagia ba'etzem. The judgment is according to scenting and smelling, which reaches the essence. In other words, and that finds expression in Chokhmah, in the wisdom, even to reveal Seichel. In other words, when he negates the other ones, he says, the starting point is not Seichel. The starting point is not the conventional way of approaching matters of this nature. The starting point is not the analysis. The starting point is the etzem. And that finds expression in a revealed way, even in Seichel. And soon the Rebbe is going to spell out in a very beautiful way, in a very practical way, what is the difference between judging somebody based on Seichel, starting from Seichel, or judging somebody starting from something which is completely beyond, like he says over here, from Reach, and then bringing it down into Seichel. But for that we have to wait until tomorrow or the day after, until we get into it. And hopefully then, these very technical, Kabbalistic terms will have some more meat. We'll be able to have a sense of what the Rebbe is trying to get at.